Next up, we have Olivia Mercado Velasco.
Sorry, I'm a little short. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia, and I'm going to present Lost in Translation, Framing the Wayfinding Experience through the Lens of a City Language. First, I want you to think about how you got here today. Perhaps you took the same subway line you get into when you're coming to the side of the city. You sort of walked fast through some blocks because it was raining. You were guided by some family members or friends, or you had to double check for directions, most likely with the help of your phones, to know exactly where you were going and how you would get here, and even if the trains were running on schedule. Well, when I first arrived into the city last fall, that's what I was doing all the time. I got on the wrong side of the tracks to take the subway and relied heavily on Google Maps to figure out where I was and where I needed to go. Looking at the city maps, I was what you would call a first-time or unfamiliar user, which is great because that's the exact audience wayfinding systems are striving to help. But while I was looking at the maps, I realized that they only make sense if you understand the context you are in. Otherwise, being told you are here doesn't really make sense. I also caught myself thinking how the wayfinding experience in a city doesn't really translate as charmingly into the apps I was constantly using, because the process there is more isolated, transactional, and replaces my sense of spatial perception. In a way, it feels like outsourcing knowledge. That's when my research question started to emerge. How does wayfinding act as a cultural marker of changes in the built environment? And how can we actually evaluate their success? How are their audiences integrating them in their everyday language? And it is in that consideration of language that semiotician Roland Barthes guided my journey. As he says, the city speaks to us and thus becomes a discourse. We also speak to our city by living in it and wandering through it. American urban planner Edmund Bacon also came into play. He claimed that the way in which we perceive cities can be seen as their very life force. So, rather than viewing cities as physical artifacts, if we focus on those perceptions of the city, then it becomes a sort of language I needed to decode, both as an outsider and as a design practitioner. Because cities are systems of systems, after all. Looking at their structures, we can see how bricks can turn into buildings that can turn into blocks, amount to neighborhoods, communities, and finally cities. That structure is actually very similar to the one of a language, where you have words that turn into sentences, then we assign meanings to those. Well, thinking about how this framework of a city as a language intersects with the built environment, an object that exemplifies what I meant emerged from my research: the bodegas. These small corner stores typical of New York that serve as historical markers of the city's large and ethnically diverse history. Sign installation is regulated by the New York City Building Code and the New York City Zoning Resolution. So, in that way, they respond to the bureaucratic structural language. And they are actually very New York local. Many cities might have corner stores, but they are not bodegas. On the other side, they are very hyperlocal. You can find something in one particular corner that you're not going to find anywhere else in the city. And they became places where members of a community interact with each other and find things that actually remind them of home. These neighborhood landmarks started to make their way, particularly within Hispanic communities. Most of them were opened by Puerto Rican immigrants who moved into New York after World War II. As the Spanish-speaking population of New York continued to expand, the word bodega began to be used outside Hispanic communities, where it was interchangeable with other terms, including the ones to refer to a store by what it sold, like candy store or newsstand. And they became the ultimate light-hearted symbol of consumer access, and we can spot patterns in their aesthetic, small characteristics that actually can get commodified, proving that the bodega aesthetic has made its way beyond being inside immigrant neighborhoods, and is now part of the language and identity of an entire city. And overlaying their disposition across New York with the subway lines makes it even more noticeable. They are on the way, literally. More bodegas are closer to subway station as a tactic to get access to people emerging from their commutes who trust they will find one really close to buy exactly what they need in a short period of time. Using these metaphors of cities as languages is another way to view complex city dynamics, in which you have an official language, you have the neighborhood that suddenly interacts with that structure, and then the inhabitants, who are the speakers and are moving through those two spaces simultaneously. And maps or wayfinding systems are communicating those nuances to both outsiders and insiders. And then, between all these, is the work of the designer, who has to talk across the whole spectrum, be the translator, the code switcher, between the language and the creoles. That's when we become better facilitators of the needs of a city structure and the needs of the citizens. Designers can actually not negate the importance of the vernacular language because it is the base that keeps this official structure always active, always representative of its times. If we could use this metaphor of the city language to interrogate the effectiveness of wayfinding systems once they are in place, we could ask meaningful questions for the people who are actually using the systems. Questions like, how do people respond once they are no longer first-time users of the systems in place? How do we ensure designers are doing work to recognize the very important self-identity building that happens in these local spaces? I envision this methodology to be helpful, not even just for designers. For example, I could take my observations into another city. How do the bricks look like? Their history. Is it brown stone, just gray stone? If the blocks follow a really well-structured grid, or if it's off the grid completely because it cannot be applied due to natural constraints. We can understand how the city speaks in that way. And then we can analyze how the wayfinding systems are stating an identity and bringing uniqueness to the area. I know bodegas are very New York local, but if they are like, the coffee shops in France that are everywhere and easy to spot, then we could all do this exercise when we travel or even in our own cities. What are the bodegas of the city you live in? If you don't live in New York, of course. Or if you do, then you can find something else. How are those places and designed objects engaging with the communities? What are the colorful characteristics they add to the city language? Thank you.
Give it up for Olivia.